The two Fullerton police officers that were charged in the beating death of Kelly Thomas have been acquitted of both their charges. Manuel Ramos was one of those police officers. He was facing a charge of second-degree murder and involuntary manslaughter. And Jay Cicinelli was the other police officer who was charged with excessive force and involuntary manslaughter. Now, after 2 days of deliberations, the jury decided, you know what, we are not going to find them guilty. They are acquitted. And this is definitely problematic because if you can remember 2 years ago when Kelly Thomas was beaten to death by these police officers, it caused a media firestorm. People were livid and outraged over the treatment and the excessive force that was evident in the video that went viral online. Now, for those of you who don't remember the story clearly, we are going to show you the video in question, but I do want to warn you guys, it's extremely graphic, and then we're going to show you what Kelly Thomas looked like in the hospital bed where he died. Now, again, the video's graphic. Let's take a look.
I'm gonna force my hand, and we want to do this. Go ahead. Sit down, put your foot in the back. Okay, that's fine. Go down there. Would you just fucking? Would you just fucking? All right. Get on the ground now. Get on the ground. Get on the ground.
So Kelly Thomas was schizophrenic. He was tased in the face twice by Cicinelli. As you can see, there were 6 police officers attempting to subdue him, and they did subdue him, but they continued to beat him with batons and tase him.
So, look, they got to get trained better on how to deal with people who have mental conditions, because I understand the frustration initially, right? So the guy won't listen to your orders, he's schizophrenic and he's got issues, right? But there are X number of people out there that have those issues, so we got to train our cops to be able to deal with it. And do they have to use force from time to time to subdue someone? Of course they do. That's the nature of their job. We all get that, right? But you just saw the tape. I mean, look, first of all, when you're tasing somebody, I'm not an expert on this, but my guess is after you tase them the first time, give them a chance to comply with your orders. Because when you're getting tased, my guess is you're shaking, right? Mm-hmm. It's not easy to move your arms and say, okay, look, I'm putting my arms behind my back, I'm rolling over. You're in the middle of getting tased. So the 6 tases in a row doesn't really help. It's a little counterproductive, right?
Yeah, so I was under the impression that when you tase someone, it makes it extremely easy to subdue them. And if you look at the video, you look at the full video, you see that he's on the ground and there are 6 police officers there on the scene. So I don't really understand why they had to continue beating him after he was, by the way, if you can hear him, he keeps saying, "Dad, help, Dad, Dad." His father was a former police officer.
It's
such a
father was
story.
was in the courtroom. It's heartbreaking. If you're a dad and you hear that, and he keeps saying, "Please, please," he's obviously trying to comply. Midway through, there's very little question about that, right? They broke his bones. And he died in the hospital.
He died 5 days later in the hospital. We have a photo of what he looked like in the hospital bed, and I think it's important to show you guys so you get a sense of the extent of injuries that he suffered. It's very graphic. I'm sorry, I should have warned you guys.
Jesus Christ, man.
So again, these police officers were acquitted. They were found not guilty of excessive force, of involuntary manslaughter, and there is absolutely no excuse for that ruling. That ruling, in my opinion, is 100% wrong. According to the Los Angeles Times, jurors agreed with defense attorneys that the officers were trying to subdue an unruly suspect, not beat him to death. And apparently in this case, since it involves police officers and since they are usually considered justified in using force, the prosecutors had to prove an intent to cause harm, right? So that was the burden.
And I understand that. Look, if you're a random guy and you just come up to somebody and starts clubbing him over the head and tasing him and stuff, there's almost de facto intent. I mean, what the hell did you do that for, right? Now, for a cop, he sometimes has to do that as part of his job. So when he crosses the line, you have to see if he intended to do the guy bodily harm rather than just to try to subdue him. It makes prosecution and conviction much, much harder. So like the Zimmerman case, I don't agree with the result of the jury. We do have a jury system. They did consider it for 2 days, which actually in this context is considered a short period of time. Yeah. And they came back and they ruled not guilty. So that is what it is. And there's, I guess, nothing we can do about that. And that's our system. But it is awfully frustrating from time to time as you see this. Because yes, in the beginning, it appears their intention was to subdue him. I don't doubt that. By the end, my look at that tape, and I wasn't there on the jury the whole time, but looking at that tape, it doesn't appear that by the end their intention was just to subdue him. And it looked like, I mean, one of the cops had put on tape, put on the gloves and said, all right, here we go, right? And it looked like their intent was to harm him and to do him very grave bodily harm.
So let me jump in for a second. The defense in this case did a really great job in distracting the jury from what really happened, which was excessive force. And the way that they did that is they spent a considerable amount of time focusing on what led to the eventual death of Kelly Thomas, right? So they're having these ridiculous debates and discussions about his past drug use. Oh, he didn't die from getting beaten up. He died because it turns out that he did methamphetamine in the past and he had an enlarged heart. In fact, they called someone up to the stand, Dr. Stephen Kroc, and he's a forensic pathologist who studies how drugs affect the heart. After viewing slides of Thomas's heart cells, Kroc said his death was caused by an enlarged heart due to previous methamphetamine use. That's ridiculous. Really?
And by the way, he had no drugs in his system that day. So they love to do this. I mean, look, I hate to bring this up in this context, but it was like when Michael Hastings' toxicology report came out and they said the drugs in his system were so trace that they did not affect the accident. What did the entire media do? He was on drugs.
He was on drugs.
But no, the report said the opposite. He wasn't on drugs that night. And with this guy, he wasn't on drugs that night, right? But they're like, oh, but since he's a druggie, what they're really saying is, come on, what were the cops supposed to do with this druggie, right? But they come up with this excuse about the enlarged heart, and that's why he died. Well, you know, his enlarged heart probably wouldn't have been an issue if you hadn't beaten him to death.